Hi, Jessica here. Just a quick note before we begin. This episode came out before Reimagining the Workplace became the ReImagination Café. Same spirit, same heart, just a new name that better reflects how we've evolved. Hello and welcome. I'm Jessica Cherry, host of the Reimagining the Workplace podcast. And this special background track is a supplement to our podcast episode titled Hope is Not Silent, Forging the Path to a Trans-Inclusive Workplace with Jess Skaare. Now, this is something we've never done before, but I'm really excited about sharing this additional background information about Jess for any of our listeners who may be interested in learning more about her personal experience grappling with her gender identity. So during our conversations, in addition to talking about things we can all do to make our workplaces more trans-inclusive, and sharing her experience transitioning while working at Pfizer's corporate headquarters in New York, Jess provided me with a very raw account of what she calls her journey to self-acceptance. From feeling at a young age like something was off, but not really realizing what it was, to her years of just kind of plugging along, maintaining the status quo, and resigning herself to being a secondary character in her own life, to finally exploring that aspect of herself that lay hidden away for so long, and accepting and ultimately celebrating herself as the amazing, multifaceted transgender woman that she is. Now, I always ask a lot of my podcast guests. We don't have one conversation, do a little bit of editing, and voila, we're good to go. Rather, we have multiple conversations over several weeks, and I always ask for a lot of background information because I feel that by increasing my level of understanding, I can ask better, more informed questions, go deeper, and hopefully produce a better podcast episode for my listeners. Now, typically, a fair amount of that background information ends up on the cutting room floor, so we can get to the parts about creating better workplaces, which is what I promised my listeners. But I don't want that to happen this time, because there is so much about the trans experience that many of us don't know. Some of us don't have firsthand experience with someone who's openly transgender, and we may feel uncertain about the best way to engage, how to be curious so that we can increase our understanding without being intrusive. Personally, I believe that listening to stories about individuals whose lives are very different from our own, whose experiences may be hard for us to fathom, and really delving deep if someone is comfortable having that conversation, I believe each of those stories lays a foundation for a bridge of sorts, a bridge to better understanding and hopefully to more compassion, more acceptance, and more humanity in the world. So I'm sharing this supplemental track, which sets out the most personal parts of what Jess so generously shared with me over the course of our conversations, with that lofty goal in mind. I really hope that you enjoy it. Jess, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. And at the outset, I do just want to say that while I am an employee of Pfizer, everything I'm going to say is my personal opinions. I'm doing this in a personal capacity, and nothing I say during our conversation should be attributed to Pfizer. I'm not here as a representative of the company, but only for myself.
So to start us off, can you tell us a little bit about your background and your upbringing?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Pittsburgh, grew up there with a wonderful set of parents who adopted me and my brother. They went to a Christian college and they found us through friends that they knew from college. It was a privately arranged adoption through this Christian network. And it was core to my upbringing that I've always known I was adopted since as young as I can remember. My parents were very upfront about that, and it was a very joyous thing to talk about. My parents, in addition to having met at a Christian college, my dad has his master's in divinity. Ultimately, he felt like he wasn't called to be a pastor. He realized he liked to talk too much and he wasn't so good at the listening part. So instead, he got his master's in communication. But even with that, we always still had a strong grounding in church life. And so I think those are key aspects of my upbringing, that there was with a very close and loving family and also often associated or connected through different events at church. I think very fondly back on growing up.
And at what point did you start to grapple with your gender identity?
I have different limited memories of my childhood, but I didn't necessarily have a certitude about my gender being off. I think there is a sense of something being disrupted, but not as sure as I've seen from other people's journeys who are trans.
As part of my research for this conversation, I read a book by Jennifer Finney Boylan called She's Not There, where Jennifer describes her very personal story, her trans experience, and it's a wonderful, wonderful book. And she shares that when she was 3 years old, she knew with complete certainty that she was a girl. And I've heard several other stories of people who at a very young age knew intuitively that they were a certain gender, even though it didn't match the body they were living in. And I actually think that that may be the narrative that people are most familiar with. But of course, it's not the only story. And in fact, your story is quite different and equally important to share. So can you tell us a bit about your experience?
Of course. What I first want to say, Jennifer's story is so valid and powerful and true. Even though we have different experiences, that's, I think, one of the things to help people understand is that the experiences are not all the same. I think that journey that she described, not only is it certainly common and happens to a lot of people, but for a long time, it was believed to be the only story. And so if you wanted to get care from a doctor, if you wanted to talk to a psychiatrist, if you wanted to get anything, especially from insurance, you sometimes had to give that story to receive any care because any other journey wasn't seen as valid or legitimate, which again, not to say that that's not real. It's a very real and very common story, but yeah, for others, it's not quite as stark as it is.
So for you, you had some sense that something was off, but you weren't sure what it was. So looking back today, were there signs of gender dysphoria even way back then?
When I look back on those times, I think I can see signs. I think I can see, oh, that probably meant X and Y, but I have to be kind of careful with myself not to make too many presumptions that what's being through the lens of my current experience looking back and what was actually signs of gender dysphoria back then.
And can you define gender dysphoria for our audience?
Absolutely. And by the way, for all these things, obviously, I'm giving my personal story, my personal impressions. And so then to a degree, my personal definition. Gender dysphoria, to the degree to which your gender is innate, that you have a sense of who you are and what your gender is. And for those who are experiencing dysphoria, it's recognizing that there is a dissonance, an emotional and often physical distress that comes from your body not matching who you are in your head. It's something that used to be thought of as a mental illness. It's not. And I think that's a big thing to correct because a lot of people still think that. The American Psychiatric Association no longer lists it as a mental disorder. They haven't for quite a while. In the current DSM guidelines, it is recognized as this sort of physical experience. And it's something that can happen to trans people. It's not necessary to have it to be trans. It's often just more of a reality if you're don't get to grapple with your gender identity, then dysphoria can emerge, and dysphoria can lead to lots of different problems, especially different kinds of distress and anxiety that you might experience that people who are the same as their gender assigned at birth don't experience because they don't have that same dissonance.
So what was your first experience thinking of yourself as or identifying with girls?
I grew up in the 80s and 90s when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles cartoon was very popular. And that was my go-to. I loved that cartoon. And that's actually one of my earliest memories, thinking back, was having a dream. And my dreams for a long time were me being in an episode of the Turtles, and I was going on these different adventures. But it was really about me and April, where April and I were doing all these different things, and we maybe were hiding from the bad guys or something. And for a lot of those things, I was thinking, oh, I want April to be my girlfriend. And that was an aspect of those dreams. But also, it kind of snuck up on me. I was always dreaming about wanting to disguise myself as her. Like I had to find ways to escape the bad guys in those dreams and disguise it. I think that notion of disguising myself was the cover my brain gave me to think about it in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise felt comfortable doing. It wasn't common when I was growing up to see any positive trans representation in any kind of media. I'm sure those people were out there. I know they were out there. Now, in hindsight, going back and reading about people across millennia who have been out and about. But for me, growing up, if you saw something on TV, it was as a punchline in a sitcom. It was on Jerry Springer, which I wasn't allowed to watch anyway as a kid. So it was like double something that was forbidden and wrong. I think I always felt like something was off, but I didn't necessarily get that it was because of gender, that it was my gender identity that was the most off thing. But if I had seen other examples, maybe I might have reached conclusions quicker. I do remember a couple other things from when I was very young, which was that my fingernails always grew super fast. And I always liked that. Not that that has to be a gender thing, but I liked that my nails were long and that they grew fast. I always hated it when I had to cut them. And all these women would come up to me as a little kid and say, "Oh, your eyelashes are amazing. They're wasted on a boy. I want those eyelashes." I think part of me had to joke and be like, agree, because I knew that was what I was supposed to do. But in my head, I'm like, no, they're mine.
Well, and then on the flip side, if people told you you were handsome, you didn't like that, right?
Yes, I didn't know why, but I was not comfortable with that.
And how did things progress during middle school, high school, and college?
So I think, again, because there's that association, not only that anything trans was wrong and a joke, but it was also that if you encountered anything in the trans universe, it was usually related to porn. It was usually something that had a heavy sexual connotation to it and all the different terminology that can go with it, especially back then. Trans wasn't a word that people were using back then. And I feel still uncomfortable using some of the other words. But that other association is where, for me, when I would struggle with aspects of gender identity, or I would think about or dream about being a different version of me, I had the added shame of not only being, all right, this isn't the way I'm supposed to be thinking of myself as a girl, but it was also, this is something that's unchristian of me because I'm thinking of sexual desire. Like it was wrapped up to a degree where I was concerned that I was just expressing a fetish and that that was therefore wrong and therefore I shouldn't be doing any of this. If I was grappling with my gender, it was at night and it was with a lot of shame. And then during the day, for the most part, I feel like I was a very cheerful, happy kid. I still feel like I've been that way sort of the whole time. But again, without the dysphoria to make me know for certain what was off, to make me know for sure what was off about me, coupled with that shame, everything was just packed in a box and put into the back of my brain. It was something I didn't actively engage with because I didn't want to.
Right, that box you don't want to open, but then when you don't, it keeps getting heavier somehow. One of the common themes in a lot of the stories I read was denial, coupled with this idea that something's going to happen to make this go away. Jennifer Finney Boylan in her book talks about how she thought if she fell in love with someone and the love was strong enough, that would make this all disappear. Does that resonate with you?
Oh, certainly. I think it's the different methods that you seek. I use a phrase that felt right to me in doing my coming out story actually last year when I finally came out to everybody, was that I felt unknowably broken.
Hmm.
I felt like there was something off and I didn't know what it was and I didn't know how to fix it. So for me, my go-to place was prayer. It was the belief that I could pray whatever this was away. And if I was actually being as good as I wanted to be, then it would stop. And that sort of expectation that was an exchange. Yeah. And I'm still a person of faith. I can see a lot of things that were wrong with that mindset back then theologically, let alone in relation to trans identity. But I, at the time, definitely had that assumption that I just wasn't being good enough. I wasn't being proper enough. And it was me just succumbing to sin that I was going back to these places and that that was a failing of mine.
That language, unknowably broken, that's so powerful and quite heartbreaking. And then I'm reminded of something you wrote where you referred to your cycle of shame, denial, and prayer to have it all go away.
Yeah, went for decades.
So after high school, you went to Penn State, got a great education. You have thoughts and maybe some fantasies about being a girl or a woman and presenting that way. But this fetish, as you thought of it, stays hidden away. So what about after college? What happened then?
After college, leaving roommates and finally living on my own is when I would finally try to indulge some of those dressing up fantasies and order clothes online. You could order things online. That was relatively new. So I could go out and get things. I wouldn't have to have that shame. I could just have it show up at my door. And I was always careful. Just what kind of packaging does this show up in? All that kind of careful hiding and avoidance to receive things shamefully in secret. So my first experiences dressing up right after college in my own apartment. The first time I did that, especially, I had no idea what I was doing, but I put on those clothes, I looked in the mirror, and it just reinforced all that shame because what I saw was just sad in a depressing way. Like it was, oh, that's not, none of this is not only not even remotely my fantasy, it's like the worst fears of the expression of that fantasy, that I was a caricature in a very unfortunate way. Because I didn't know what I was doing with makeup, with my face, with the clothes. It was all a bad combination that It reinforced none of the positive. It accentuated all of the negative fears I had. So that would be a cycle where every 3 to 5 to 7 years, I would try it, be disgusted, put everything literally in a box in the back of the closet and stop. I think a part of me knew that would always come back, that it wasn't something that was gone, which is why I didn't throw anything away. A lot of people talk about purge cycles. My mom taught me too much about not wasting things. So
You were too frugal.
But yeah, I would still hide them away. Outside of that, life was mostly really positive and good. I had wonderful friends. I had a great start to my career.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? What your first job was and what you were doing professionally?
Right after college, my first job was with a company called Cardinal Health in Columbus, Ohio. So I went from Pennsylvania to Ohio for that first job in my first 5 years of my career. I started off being a developer for the intranet. So I worked on the internal website for Cardinal Health to make edits to it, changes to it, updates and expansions on it. Over time, things changed and grew a lot. I became a trained usability analyst, and I became very familiar with brand work. Cardinal Health had just redone their branding. And so I got to help write the brand standards for all of our electronic systems. It was still everything. It wasn't digital everything yet. So I rewrote our electronic branding standards, our branding standards at that time. And then I went on to work on our external website for a bit. I was a developer on cardinalhealth.com. And the user experience training I had got led me to be able to create a role where I was the manager of user experience. So I did that for both the internal website and the external website.
And were you dating at all?
There was a few people that I at times tried to date, some lovely women over the years. And I always struggled with self-sabotage. I would be interested in this person. I wanted to be with somebody. I wanted to get married. I always assumed married by 25, kids by 28, all these things. And I was happy for that. But I think looking back, every time I would start to get close to somebody, I would usually find ways to shut things down or distance off. And it was because I always told myself, I know others, I read stories, I see them online of people who come out and they share that they're a cross dresser, it's a fetish, whatever it is. Again, I still wasn't thinking myself as trans. I was thinking I was dealing with a fetish and something. Well, if I express that to that partner after we're married, that would blow things up. So I'm not going to do that. If I'm going to marry somebody, if we're going to get serious, then I'm going to share with them what's going on with me. And because I then assumed that also meant that they would probably not stay with me, that means I was usually breaking things off or not even starting, because why bother?
So you nipped it in the bud at the beginning as a protective mechanism.
Yeah. I had a girlfriend in college and we dated for 2 years. And that was a great relationship. She was wonderful. It ended as it probably should have towards the end of college, a couple years before the end. But in the years after, I want to say 18, 20 years before I ever really dated anyone again. And it was because of that. And I think one thing that was always challenging in going to any relationship is that you want to be confident. You always hear women want a confident guy. And it's really hard to be a confident guy when you're not confident that you are a guy. I fundamentally was always feeling like I wasn't ever going to live up, not only to their expectations of a partner, where I would share something that would kind of throw them off or disgust them or make them leave me, but I wasn't even really living up to the masculine expectation that they should want in a husband. And so I think on multiple fronts, I assumed I was not going to be satisfactory and therefore ended things or didn't engage in things before we got there.
So that fear of rejection led you to don some pretty heavy armor. And I think that's something that many of us can relate to. To avoid the potential pain, we do that preemptive strike, which of course also hurts, but we feel less exposed, less vulnerable, I guess. Okay, so while all of this is going on in the background, your career is progressing. Things are going well at Cardinal Health. And then in 2008, your career took you from Dublin, Ohio to New York City. And that's when you started working at Pfizer, right?
It is, yes. I took the move for Pfizer. I left Dublin, Ohio, which I really enjoyed. It was comfortable, but I felt like it was too comfortable. So when I had the opportunity to go to New York, I leapt at it and it was great.
And can you tell us a little bit about your job at Pfizer?
I started off with a job to launch the company's first company-wide internal website that was called Pfizer World. And I helped launch that for the first few months of my job, but then I jumped over to the external world. And I was in our corporate affairs and communications department, building a variety of different things, but almost entirely focused on our public web presence and on our public corporate social media. A couple of years ago, my role was moved from the communications department to the digital department at Pfizer. But my job is still effectively the same. I do our public web presence, Pfizer.com. My team also does all of our corporate social posting, involved in the look and feel of our different country sites around the world. So a whole bunch of things in the web world that consumes most of my days. But I think it's worth noting too, as I talk about going to New York, because it's still a while until I came out, but I had a lot of people after I came out who would say to me, oh, well, you transitioned because you went to New York. You got around to all those people, all those liberals, and they changed you, especially people who I knew and close family members who are more conservative or from the church community, because I had run church services, I had run Bible studies, I'd been parts of lots of different groups. And I think it's one thing to emphasize is that moving to New York was in some ways a catalyst for me to shake things up. But it wasn't because this was a new aspect of me. It was the environment where maybe I felt more comfortable allowing myself to be me. It was always there. Yeah, not something that got put on me by New York.
That's such an important point, and I know that narrative is definitely out there. And not just for people who are trans, for so many individuals who have hidden parts of themselves for so long, and they get to a place like New York that's more accepting and they come out, and there's an assumption that New York or New Yorkers caused this to happen. And then actually, when you moved to New York, there were several years of the status quo, right?
No, it was the exact same thing. And kind of similar to leaving college. The first time I got to New York, kind of restarted another one of those cycles where I again ordered some clothes, got the old clothes back out of the closet, tried things on, was again depressed, was again shoving it all away. And so it was, if anything, a fresh opportunity to go through the same cycle I had been going through. Where, yeah, I think it was 7 years before I really grappled it with anything about my gender identity again. But again, I did that dressing up experiment. And again, it was something that was dissatisfying. And I think that last iteration of another cycle of it not working out did drive a degree of, I don't want to say depression. I think I recognize depression, especially chemical depression, is such a real and serious thing. I don't want to claim any of the realities that people who are experiencing that go through. But I definitely was down.
I've heard you refer to this period of your life as a time when you just sort of cheerfully gave up.
Yeah, I felt like a pleasant person. I don't think of myself as unhappy, but I didn't necessarily expect that anything was ever going to change or be better outside of work. Work is probably the only place where I was still driving ahead because I felt like it was the one thing where I could still find some degree of achievement.
And did you ever think about the impact of being trans or people knowing about what you at this point thought of as a fetish? Did you ever think of the potential impact of that on your career?
Oh, that's a fascinating question. I think it's fair to say that I didn't think about impacts on my career. And I don't know that there would have necessarily been any. I think being in almost any major city, not necessarily all of them, but thankfully a lot, and you're working in a corporate headquarters environment of a large organization, there typically are plenty of protections in place that I don't think I ever seriously considered that my role would be endangered. Now, that might have been a naive assumption, but it wasn't something that registered for me. But I think I was so more deeply concerned on the personal impacts to family, to my church life, to my friends, that I think work did not even come close to the radar. If there was a place I was fearful, it was in everything in my personal life, that I had never even made the mental leap to what it would mean beyond the personal life and the relationships with family.
And one of the things that you have raised during conversations we've had is that there's some degree of privilege that comes from working at the corporate headquarters of a large organization that may not exist or certainly doesn't exist everywhere. So there may be people out there who are transitioning for whom the potential impact on their career and even their safety is top of mind. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so back to your story. How were things going in your personal life?
So during that whole time, I made new friends and I lived my life. I signed up for dating programs. I created a profile on a couple of different dating applications, eHarmony in particular. I was on for like 6 years, but I never really thought anything would come of it to a large degree. I think it was the assumption that like I wasn't ever actually going to really meet someone through these channels. I wasn't going to be as suave as my friends, especially those really confident dudes who were out there with me in those groups who were picking up girls. I was always the geeky friend on the side. And I think I just resigned myself to that. And so I definitely stopped paying attention to my appearance. I gained a fair amount of weight. I grew a beard for that time. I know some people grew a beard because they saw it as like their denial beard. They wanted to do something hyper masculine. For me, I think it was, I don't really know if I care as much anymore. And I just let things slide. Well, that continued for a while until I got a wake up call.
So, several years of, I guess I'll call it kind of living the status quo. And then your friend and colleague, Leilani, took you out for drinks and did a sort of one woman intervention, which I love the way you have referred to this before. She slapped you in the face with some truth. Can you tell us about that? Everybody needs someone to slap you in the face with some truth every once in a while.
Yes, you so do. And it was remarkable for its bluntness, which I had not expected. Leilani was one of my best friends, and she still is a wonderful friend, but we don't work together anymore. But back then, not only a coworker, but as her wife put it, she was my work wife. We were together all the time and worked together on all these projects, and we definitely were very close. She took me out for drinks after work. It just seemed like an average casual thing. But when I sat down, she really let me have it. And in a very loving way was like, what's going on? You have just been letting yourself go in almost every way, and something must be off. And I didn't share at that time with her, for all that she was a bi woman who was married to another woman, like, and certainly a very accepting person. She's the one who had dragged me to be an ally at our various LGBTQ events at work because she was one of the leaders there. And I was always happy to be an ally. I was always supportive, but I still didn't share with her at that time. Because again, I didn't necessarily know what was going on with me, but I did take it to heart that I couldn't keep going like I was, that I needed to do something about myself to have a little bit more hope for the future, or at least to be more aggressive about making that hope happen rather than sitting around passively. And it gave me a bunch of different goals. I wanted to take better care of myself. I decided I wanted to get back to my college weight. And so this was in, I want to say early 2015, maybe late 2014. And so then for almost the entirety of 2015, I had a very regimented calorie counting plan. And so I lost 35 pounds, and it was great to have that happen no matter what. But there was this little thought in my head, this little extra incentive for me, which was every time I've tried to do that whole dressing up thing over the past 20, 30 years, part of why I didn't like how I looked wasn't just in what I knew or how I knew to dress myself, but also that I wasn't satisfied with my weight and my appearance. And I think that contributed to that dissatisfaction. Obviously, gender identity doesn't fix everything. So I wanted to lose the weight no matter what, but I told myself, if I can hit that goal, if I can get back to that weight, I'm going to give that whole dressing up thing one more try. And I told myself it was going to be the one last try. I think now in hindsight, I can say, well, that it definitely wouldn't have gone away. But I still told myself, if I work really hard at it, if I lose all the weight, if I start learning, I go online, I start looking at tutorials on YouTube, on Reddit, on Facebook, I start learning about what to do a better job in presenting myself better. If I can't get it right then let's call it. Again, I don't think that would have realistically happened, but that's what I told myself. Like, this is your chance. Do it for yourself. Make this as good as you can make it. And I did. I lost 35 pounds over the course of that year. And that January 1st of 2016, I woke up and I shaved off the beard and I shaved my arms and my legs. I shaved everything off. And I put together all of those lessons I had learned online. I had bought better makeup. I bought nicer wigs. I had prepped all this clothing. And again, not all these different looks or very extremes of looks. My first outfit was jeans, a sweater, and boots. And it was the exact kind of what I would want to be my go-to outfit during the winter. It was already kind of my go-to outfit, just for a different gender. When I looked in the mirror, it was such a pleasant surprise. I think I had not only set myself up to make this work, but I also had set myself up to think it might not work out. So it was a very happy moment to be like, oh, yeah, this could fly. This can work.
Let me just pause for a moment. And if you had a split screen, and if you could describe the way that you felt looking in the mirror when you were overweight, you would let yourself go, you didn't like what you saw, and how you felt in that moment, and then contrast that to you'd had this goal, and regardless of the number on a scale, you were actually actively doing something, feel better about yourself. Could you contrast the way you felt in one situation versus the other?
When I looked at myself in the mirror back in 2014, when I had that extra weight, when I wasn't caring for my appearance as much, When I looked in the mirror, if I looked in the mirror at all, it was someone going, well, yeah, what are you going to do? It was basically like, I didn't see a future. I know one thing that we might talk about is the reality of depression for a lot of people in the trans universe and what it can mean for them. I was someone who never felt the same extremes as others did. So I didn't feel like I had no future, but I didn't necessarily have a future I was excited about when I saw that version of me. I didn't want to see myself in the mirror that much. It was not someone I was excited about or proud of. It was just schlubby old me. And I can be a cheerful, good friend, but that's what life is. And I think I'd almost let myself become a secondary character in life instead of my own main character.
Mm.
And on that first day in January, when I was dressing up and happy with it for the first time, I still wasn't thinking I'm going to transition, but I was seeing a version of me that for the first time I was excited about and I was excited to explore more. It was something where this is a version of me that I want to take pictures of, that I want to see in a mirror. You know, a lot of people can talk about almost the vanity of trans folks and how many selfies we have or how often we're looking in a mirror. That can be part of it. But for me, it's a happily surprised reminder of, oh, yeah, that's what I'm showing to the world. That's what's out there. And that's what I'm seeing. I think I can count the number of selfies I had on maybe both hands in the 38 years, however long before that moment. I have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands at this point, selfies since that moment. Because, yeah, it's finally something that gives me not just energy and excitement, but joy.
So, at what point did you feel comfortable going out and presenting yourself to the world as a woman?
One of the cool things I discovered, it's something that was probably more likely here in New York City than in other places, was basically a club, a place where you can go. And every Wednesday they had a dinner. Eventually, I actually paid to have a suitcase in this place where I had a key to go in and out, but they had 5 makeup stations. And you would go there, you would change, you would maybe have dinner, you would maybe go out, you would go back, you'd change, and you'd go home. And you get to be in a place where it was very comfortable, where you could learn, you could maybe ask for tips. You could also keep things hidden from others. And for me, that was a stepping stone to eventually going out from my apartment and getting to be myself.
One of the interesting things about that story and the importance of that clubhouse is that, like so many people who live in Manhattan, you have a doorman. And of course, these are people who you talk to, you develop relationships with, they know a lot about your comings and goings. So every time you left your apartment, you walked by these individuals and you could potentially out yourself before you wanted to, right?
Yeah. And back then, before the pandemic, they were hand operated elevators. So it's not like I could even get past the doorman. I couldn't get off the floor without being in an elevator with this great collection of guys, people I considered friends. We talked a lot, and they're people I see every day, and these people I care about. And so I care about what they see with me. And yeah, they were some of the first non-LGBTQ people I came out to. And it was so I could finally leave my apartment on my own and not have to go 45 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes to travel to change there to go out.
And the reaction?
Overwhelmingly positive. It was awesome. Great. Very excited for you. Some questions, but nothing that was problematic or concerning.
One of the things we've talked about is how dark things can get for people who perhaps don't have a supportive community, or for those who have been rejected by the people they love, those who feel they will never be accepted for who they are. And I know that you met a lot of people in that situation within that clubhouse. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I got to meet so many people where that was the only time they got to be themselves. One Wednesday a week, they would come from sometimes a couple states away to be able to dress and express themselves in a way that they did not believe was possible outside of that little clubhouse. And most were older. I think it's a positive thing about younger generations that there's more positive trans examples and representation to see, or even just different kinds of gender nonconforming expression, those people who just want to cross-dress. So most people there were people who were 50s to 80s in some cases. That was something that they never believed they could share with a partner. Or if their partner knew, they were not allowed to talk about it. They just went there and did their secret thing, and then they came home and they never talked about it again. I knew a lot of people who maybe did actually try to transition or be themselves, and the stories of rejection, of a person who was a leader in a major Christian organization who was forced to step down and get kicked out, a lot of divorces, very common experiences. And a lot of people who struggle with how to manage it. I think there's a lot of people because not necessarily being trans is a difficult thing, but being accepted when you're trans is such a difficult thing that so many people struggle with mental health challenges and especially abuse challenges. The belief that you'll never get accepted. And for a lot of those people, especially older people, the evidence that you won't be accepted is overwhelming. And while I'm glad that I've never had to be in that dark a place, it's impossible to be in any trans community and not know tales, either directly or indirectly, of others who did. And even in the professional world, I knew a number of fairly senior people, but because I would suspect mostly because of their generation and their position in the company at the time and for the decades prior, believed it was impossible to ever be out. And so they never came out. And I think that's, for me, as much as a tragic thing as I got to experience my own joy to watch people have to stifle theirs, let alone go to such extremes if they feel like they're not going to be ever accepted.
Very, very tragic. People who live their whole lives feeling like they can't show their true selves to the world because they won't be accepted. And of course, some just give up. But there are also people who transition and come out later in life who embrace their true gender identity in their 50s or even later than that. There is a wonderful Netflix documentary I watched recently called Will and Harper, and it's with Will Ferrell and a very dear friend of his, Harper, who was one of the writers for Saturday Night Live, the head writer actually, and they'd worked together. And Harper transitioned male to female in her late 50s, I believe. And they go on this road trip across the country, which was something Harper had loved to do her entire life, but never as a woman. So they decide to embark on this trek across the country and to talk about Harper's transition and what it means for their friendship. But at one point, Will asks Harper if she ever had thoughts of suicide. And she did. And she describes going into a gun store and thinking about buying a gun, but ultimately deciding that she didn't want a gun in their house because she knew that on an impulse she could end up doing something. But one of the moments I found particularly powerful was after this back and forth between the two about suicidal ideation, and where Harper talks about being in this very dark place. She then immediately follows that up with, but the moment I transitioned, all I wanted to do was live. It was such an uplifting moment in the film and offering a lot of hope, I would imagine, for people who may be struggling. And perhaps that's a good segue into talking about your transition, Jess, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Thank you. I'm happy to talk about my transition. I know a lot of people aren't, and who knows what might happen for me in the future, but it's something where I am thankfully comfortable with it. I think it's also the environment that I'm in that I feel comfortable sharing my story. It's even something when I talk about other people struggling to face acceptance or what might come next for them and the challenges of not being accepted. It's a good question of what my experience might be if I didn't live here and I wasn't at my current stage of life when I came out and when I started to transition, because I got to do so with a lot of privilege. I get to live in an area where ideally it shouldn't just be because anyone's liberal or conservative, but certainly odds are it's going to be more accepting in a liberal place. And that's been true here in New York City, where I've never felt any discomfort getting to be the real version of myself, thankfully, at least so far. But I'm white. I'm well off. I transitioned later in life, which means I had more resources and more support networks in place. And I was lucky that those support networks didn't change and didn't go away when I transitioned. I'm single, which means I didn't have to worry about what would happen with family. I could make that decision for myself, at least in terms of a partner or children. So all those things made it a much simpler process for me. There are certainly still challenges, but I recognize I had a lot of hurdles removed that are present for a lot of others, which I think is part of why I not only feel like I've been blessed with how smoothly my transition went, but why I also feel comfortable talking about my transition, because I want to share that story and hopefully give some positive hope for others who might have more hurdles to encounter, which might mean that they're maybe less likely to share. And I want to be a story that I wish I could have heard when I was younger.
Oh, I love that. So, Jess, you refer to your transition as being very smooth, but it was quite a while, even after you looked in the mirror and liked what you saw. It was still quite a while before you realized or acknowledged that you were trans, right?
Yeah. For a long time after that January 1st of 2016, when I finally saw a version of me I was excited about, I still didn't fully believe and hadn't really grappled with myself and with my identity to come to the realization that I was transgender. It was something where I was very happy with how I looked. I started to join some communities online, on Facebook, on Reddit, on Flickr, which is still a big community. Back then, it was a place where you posted a lot of pictures for folks who were cross-dressing. And it was wonderful to see the feedback. I got some great response. My social channels at the time blew up a bit, which was very exciting. It never happened before. I never really even engaged in social media before, even though it was part of my profession, because there wasn't a lot I wanted to say. But now suddenly there was a community that I wanted to share with. And so that was all exciting. But I still didn't think I was trans, not because I didn't want to be, but because I believed I wasn't good enough. It's one of those different kinds of imposter syndromes that can hit.
This is such an interesting part of your story, I think, because the common narrative is, oh, I don't want to be trans.
I think it's because a lot of people don't want all of the stigmas and problems that come with the reality of being a trans person and all of the hurdles to go through.
Of course.
They certainly would prefer maybe to just be the gender that they know themselves to be from birth, but not having that dysphoria again. I had a hard time nailing down why I wanted to be a woman. And I often said I didn't necessarily have the dysphoria, but the euphoria was extremely strong, where I definitely felt a lot of joy in seeing myself as Jess. And so that was something I was excited to be, but because I didn't trust my motivations, because I still had that ingrained thing from childhood that this is a fetish and that this is wrong, I had such a huge struggle countering that. And if anything, that was one of the things the entire time I was dressing that I was constantly balancing and constantly praying about, that please don't let this be wrong.
I know you went to therapy and you were kind of hoping that your therapist would say that you were trans and get that validation so you didn't feel like you were this imposter. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. My general practitioner specialized in trans care. And I told him, I don't know if I'll ever transition, but I picked you so I could have the option. So if I wanted to, we would be good to go. And he's like, that's cool. New York is an informed consent state. If you want to, you can start it whenever, but I think it would be good for you to talk to a therapist. And I absolutely agree 1,000%. And so when I did finally find a therapist, I found someone who I thought would be as rigorous from a scientific standpoint and diagnostic standpoint as possible. I picked someone who had helped contribute to WPATH, the World Professional Association on Transgender Health, the group that comes up with the standard of care for trans people. She specialized in trans care with her practice. So it was someone who I'm like, all right, this is an authority that I'm going to go in and I know the narrative to say. We talked about towards the start, that idea that I knew as a child, it's this and this, like I knew what levers I could pull if I wanted to game my way.
You're like thinking that you're manipulating the system, right?
I know. Well, that self in hindsight, like who would want to manipulate the system if you were not trans? That is not a thing that you do if you're cisgender. But still at the time, because I didn't trust my motives, I'm like, I'm going to be raw. I'm going to put it all out there. I'm going to try to lean in even to those doubts and those insecurities and those questions about why I'm there and what my motives are. And I remember 15 minutes in, it's a 45-minute session, and I petered out after 15 minutes. I don't know how I managed to cram it in that small, but
This was in you for a long time. I'm sure it just came spewing out, right?
yeah, I finally wound down in front of her. And I remember in this almost sarcastic way, she goes, yeah, okay, it's fair to say that you're transgender. And then she said it so lightly sarcastically,
Right.
which was great, but it was also exactly what I needed to hear. I think the next day I reached out to my doctor to get hormones started. This was in 2019. So 3 years of me going out and dressing, 2 years going to that clubhouse where 2 to 3 times a week I would go there, dress, go out, come back, dress, undress, go home.
And had you come out to anyone at this point?
The first people I ever came out to were both coworkers, but also 2 very close friends. It was Leilani and my other friend, Jen, both bi women, both married to other women, and both extremely close friends.
And you've shared with me previously how that initial coming out to Leilani and Jen went. And it's actually a funny story. Would you be willing to share that?
Absolutely. I was so nervous. I remember my hands were shaking, and we're sitting at the Hofbrau house, which is a big German beer hall on 45th Street. and a few blocks from work where our office was at the time. So I try to explain what's going on. I was extremely anxious. And as a result, I was way too vague in my description of what I was trying to convey. So when I referred to dressing up, apparently the way I said it, it came across like I just like to dress fancy. And Jen actually thought that meant I was walking around my apartment in a tuxedo.
I love that.
But again, it speaks to how unclear I was in trying to explain what was going on. And finally, one of the waitresses walked by in a dirndl, traditional German women's dress. And I have one of those. And she goes, oh,
Now I get it.
oh, yes. And so then I felt comfortable. I could start to share pictures, which I was so nervous to do, but so excited to do. Because I wanted someone to be like, hey, I'm not wrong, right? Like this looks great, right? And so not only was she supportive, then Leilani came along and Leilani got the story. And Leilani was like, all right, well, this is great. I'm going to have you talk to this person, and then we'll start your transition. And it was a couple months into starting to dress. I did not think I was transitioning yet. So I was definitely like, whoa, please slow way down. But it was still so wonderful to have someone who was so excited to see that.
One of the things that really strikes me about the trans experience is all those years that you're trying to figure out your gender identity. It's invisible. This struggle is so private, no one can see it. And then when you transition, it's so visible, right? It's very different than someone who's gay who comes out. They can come out to who they want, right? And keep it private. But when all of a sudden you're dressing as a woman, it's something that is so visible. And I just think that that's really interesting. And it's such a drastic change. And I can see why, after all those years of having this secret and something that was so invisible, why you would want to be like, let me show this to everybody.
Especially because that was the part that gave me the most joy. So I wanted to relay that.
Can you talk about the part of your transition when you started taking hormones while working? And I should mention that you were transitioning during the pandemic. So very unique circumstances there.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I recognize I had a privilege that might have been unique for the time that it was. The pandemic was unquestionably awful and a tragedy in so many ways. But for me and the timing of my journey, where I started hormones in late 2019 and then lockdowns were starting the spring of next year, it was almost perfect purely from that perspective of being able to transition at home. Where I was on camera, I was certainly seeing people on Zoom, Teams calls, and other sorts of WebEx things, but I was able to frame the camera very carefully on my face, my hair, which has been growing out for years and still is. I need a good hairstylist. But I was able to pull my hair back. I was able to wear a hoodie and cover my chest when that started to grow in. So I was able to carefully manage what people saw and when they saw it, so that I didn't really have an awkward phase of having to be in the office and not being able to be one binary or the other, which is for me and my personal comfort. I wanted to be one or the other. I know there's some people who the second they know they have to come out to everybody, and that's great and that's wonderful. For me, it was the second I am always that person that I saw in the mirror, the second I can be that person constantly, or at least with the minimum of effort, that's the moment I want to be out. That's the moment I want to flip that switch and be me. So I intentionally took my time transitioning.
And then, of course, you had to choose a name. So why did you choose Jess?
My brother and my mom both had the same first initial, J, and so did I when I changed my name. So I wanted to keep that. I wanted to kind of keep my initials the same. I thought that would be convenient, if nothing else. I will say there is the formal version. So Jessica is still there. The first name is Jessica, but I've always thought of myself as a pretty casual person. So I like the idea of having a diminutive that feels a little bit light and cheerful. And so that's where Jess hit the sweet spot.
And I've always loved my name. I think you picked a beautiful name.
Thank you. Me too. Me too.
Now, I know you came out to close friends first, but what about people from your past? People you grew up with, people you ran church services with, your family? What kind of a reaction did you get there?
Most people were extremely positive. I don't think I really had anyone express anything negative. In fact, I only ever got one email that I can remember where someone said, I love you, but I don't think you're doing the right thing. Eventually, I came out to my parents, which was certainly tough, I think, for all of us, but ultimately went very well. They're wonderful and very loving people. And so we talked through questions and we got to good places.
So you were coming out to people outside of work, getting a lot of support, and to some people at work who you knew well. But your official coming out as Jess, that email blast that went out to everyone at Pfizer, was in August of 2023. So 7 years after you first looked at yourself in the mirror and thought for the first time, this could work. What reaction did you get from people at work, from your colleagues who maybe didn't know you as well?
One of those testaments, I think, to Pfizer's culture, that if I was having a bad day, I would find someone to come out to. It was a joy. Like everyone was always so excited that I got to share something with them personally. I feel like we always had then a very deep conversation. I feel like being able to unburden and reveal all of myself has invited a similar amount of sharing from others. And so that we get to have much deeper conversations than we ever had before. So every coming out was great. That I was almost sad when I finally came out to everybody.
It's like you became an adrenaline junkie, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really wonderful to hear about all of the support you received from others when you transitioned. But before we wind down, I want to circle back to your personal trans journey, which you refer to as your journey to self-acceptance. Where are you on that journey now?
I am pretty far along in that journey. I think for me, the big self-acceptance I had to do was just acknowledging that I was trans. Not because it was a fight to accept that I was trans, it's because I didn't feel like I was trans enough. For me to get over that hurdle was everything. And now that I'm past that hurdle, things have opened up so much. And I think the ability to accept myself has translated in so many ways to other parts of my life where I feel like I bring more joy to them than I did before. Not because I wasn't a cheerful person, but because there's one less mental hurdle that's holding me back.
That makes so much sense. And sometimes accepting ourselves can be as difficult, sometimes even more difficult, I think, than getting others to accept us. But gosh, when we do, everything changes. You go to different conferences, do a lot of presentations, share your story in various forums like this one, and of course, thank you for that. But what motivates you to speak publicly about your personal story?
I think everyone has different talents that they enjoy bringing to bear in different ways. In some ways, it actually is self-satisfying to have opportunities to speak in ways that are a bit less focused on just the day-to-day reality of the technical world than the other I'm involved in. And while that's a pleasure, I recognize it's also a privilege and opportunity that not everyone has, both that I've had opportunities to speak and that I have a comfort in speaking that not everyone has. And so that's something where I feel like if I have those gifts, that it's almost wrong not to use them as much as I can, or hopefully effectively as I can. I think there's a lot of truth in the knowledge that it's harder to hate someone once you start to get to know them. And so I figure if I'm already someone who is fairly gregarious and wants to be friendly and wants to engage with other people, if I can find more ways to get them to know me, then hopefully there's going to be less angst to encounter out in the world, and not just for me, but for others.
Amen to that. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Jess, thank you so much for sharing your personal story with me. For our listeners, as I mentioned at the start, this is a special supplement to our podcast episode, which is called Hope is Not Silent, Forging the Path to a Trans-Inclusive Workplace. The podcast contains some, but not all of the conversations that we've shared here. There's greater emphasis on the workplace, including some really great strategies from Jess on how to create a trans-inclusive culture. I hope that those of you listening to this conversation will also listen to that podcast episode. Thank you again to Jess Skaare. For Reimagining the Workplace, I'm Jessica Cherry, and as always, thank you so much for listening.